Hello. This is a read-along of my dissertation proposal. This dissertation is a joke on the discriminant functions of emotional speech production by Logan Hale. This was recorded using binaural audio microphones, microphone in each ear basically. So it'll capture me speaking from my perspective, as well as random sounds from my apartment. So the ideal method of listening to this would be headphones, I suppose. If you want those things, that would be ideal. If you don't, then do something else. Listen to a speaker. Or read it. Anyway, let me get started. The setup. Before we get started with the dissertation, there are a few things you need to do. First, manage your affect. Eliminate any feelings of hunger, thirst, drowsiness, stress, etc., which will affect your analysis of my writing negatively or cause you to become distracted. Better yet, ensure you've set up established daily routines to eat, drink, sleep, meditate, and such prior to engaging with this paper. As a negative example, if you aren't getting your daily required fiber, B vitamins, vitamin E, pre and probiotics, etc., this will influence your gut microbiome and drastically limit the availability of dopamine and serotonin in your brain. As around 50% of our dopamine and 90% of our serotonin comes from the gut, a healthy gut will result in more focused thought via the GABA system and heightened spikes of joy via the opioid system. Also, be sure to accurately set your expectations. This is not a standard dissertation. I would argue that standard dissertation is an oxymoron. The graphic below represents the intended structure of this paper. Graphic notes. As emotions are around 30% influenced by sentiment and around 70% influenced by affect, this paper is around 30% science and around 70% philosophy and art. This is an intentional design approach to represent the central theme, emotion, in a creative manner. APA and other guidelines will be appropriately ignored if they conflict with the central design approach. At its core, there is an actual scientific dissertation, but it'll be bookended and dotted with philosophical discussions of emotion, jokes, wordplay, off-topic stories, and meta-comments. The absolute relation threshold, art, represents the point at which things become arguably unrelated to the scientific core. Introduction. Happiness is a hard master, particularly other people's happiness. Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. And then we have a comic I'll read through. Anyway, I could care less. I think you mean you couldn't care less? Saying you could care less implies you care at least some amount. I don't know. We're these unbelievably complicated brains drifting through a void, trying in vain to connect with one another by blindly flinging words into the darkness. Every choice of phrasing and spelling and tone and timing carries countless signals and contexts and subtexts and more, and every listener interprets these signals in their own way. Language isn't a formal system. Language is glorious chaos. You can never know for sure what any words will mean to anyone. All you can do is try to get better at guessing how your words affect people, so you can have a chance of finding the ones that'll make them feel something like what they want you want them to feel. Everything else is pointless. I assume you're giving me tips on how you interpret words because you want me to feel less alone. And if so, then thank you. That means a lot. But if you're just running my sentences past some mental checklist so you can show off how well you know it, then I could care less. Well, that comic is from XKCD. I could care less. And one more quote. Happiness is not a state to arrive at, but a manner of traveling. Margaret Lee Runbeck. A webcomic about the complexity of language, sandwiched between two quotes about happiness. I call it the Sandwich Technique 2, Electric Boogaloo. Is this a good way to start a dissertation? It depends, I guess, on the point of dissertations and the particular point of this particular dissertation. The point of dissertations in general is to test some individual's mastery of a specific topic, so they may be bestowed the title of doctor, the ultimate sign of seemingly earned respect, which signifies in a single word, and authoritative knowledge on that subject. There are an infinite number of better ways to test this than a dissertation, yet we are beholden to tradition, aka peer pressure from dead people. Dissertations and the dissertation process are antiquated, nonsensical, inappropriate, momentum-destroying, orphan-crushing machines that exist for the sake of their own existence. They are a joke. No joke. Sometimes documents are written by the author's mother, or by generative artificial intelligence such as ChatGPT, as I have seen personally, but I would consider these success stories in opposition to a broken system. More commonly, I have seen at least a dozen motivated, deserving individuals drop out of college or have their careers and lives delayed or destroyed by them. One would be a travesty. Multiple mark a damnable aspect of the system which 100% no question requires change. There is a Japanese saying relevant to this situation. If you get on the wrong train, get off at the next station. The longer you stay, the more expensive the return trip will be. The scientific community has ridden over 100 years in the wrong direction on this sunk-cost railroad, and it's time to board a new train to progress in the modern age. Inaction is equivalent to evil. I will do my part by treating this dissertation as the joke it is, while also demonstrating my mastery of psychology. I will adhere to the minimum requirements of ever-changing, ever-arbitrary APA guidelines, university policies, and committee member whims and personalities as much as is required to get through this. That's the only way this is happening. Now let's talk about this dissertation specifically. Approaching a document as long as this is daunting, both for the reader and the writer. So I will set the stage thematically and emotionally in the following section. Words, words, words. I call myself a design psychologist if I'm forced to describe what I do in one title. I believe it gets closest to what skills and knowledge I've mastered in relation to my profession. Aside from scientist, which lies somewhere in the teens in terms of my order of roles in life, I am an artist, musician, engineer, writer, reverend, and so on and so on. These are all just words, but they have significant meaning ascribed to them. Meanings we've built over time through education and interaction with the world and its people. Neurologically, nouns such as these show distinct, uncentralized networks of activation across the brain, much like, spoiler alert, emotions. Adjectives, as well, show distinct neural activation on top of the noun they describe, modifying it to a more unique and specific state. My approach to the design of anything starts here, with adjectives. Using 5 to 7 adjectives helps build a holistic idea of something complex such as this dissertation, helping one paint the picture more clearly in the mind. This specific dissertation was designed with the following 7 core adjectives in mind, which the reader should use as a basis for their expectations and analysis of my writing. 1. Conversational. 2. Innovative. 3. Concise. 4. Informative. 5. Professional. 6. Interesting. And 7. Enjoyable. CCPI. The acronym makes for a more memorable mnemonic, and there's a specific order I'd like to talk about them. First and foremost, as it's likely the most obvious, this dissertation is conversational. I am writing it as I speak it. People have a tendency to insert their own biases and voices into others' writing, coined by Suller as solipsistic introjection. Don't do that, please. Imagine I am talking to you. Sentence length, parentheticals, punctuation, and so on all have conversational properties which reflect the prosody of speech, tone, rhythm, emphasis, etc. On second thought, instead of reading this at all, go watch a video of me reading through the entire thing here. You're literally listening to it right now. The video version will convey the appropriate timing and delivery of the information better than you can simulate in your head. Innovative goes along naturally with any good scientist's aversion to standardization. My psyche will not allow me to write the same type of dissertation that has been written by anyone else, or to do the same type of research as anyone else. Science without innovation is public masturbation. Dissertations without paradigm shifts are just check boxes. Concise is a tricky one. Dissertations have an oft-spoken yet never elaborated upon minimum page count and reference count which need to be reached. I will keep things as brief as possible, however. Ideally, this would be a quick 20-minute read at most, in and out. stating the basic justification with a select handful of articles before getting into precise technical details about the study, ending in a quick overview and discussion. But remember, this is a joke. As such, I will inevitably be forced to expand on things until an adequate level of filler is reached. Informative likely doesn't need an explanation. For the sake of parallelism, though, it does deserve its own paragraph. This dissertation will contain information, and that information will be relayed to you as meaningfully as possible. Professional is an often misused term. Most use it as a synonym for conformity, in wearing a predefined clothing style, filtering language, and separating personality from work. But I use it here in the more accurate sense. Doing and being what is necessary for your profession. This looks different in every profession, and as stated above, I am a design psychologist. So analyzing and discussing the design of this dissertation as it goes on is necessary. As well, I intend to have the profession of professor. A teacher's job is to translate known information to the minds of students, and a professor's job takes this one step further, understanding the information well enough to be your own source of information. Teachers rely on and refer to transactive memory sources such as textbooks and articles, whereas professors are their own memory sources, only referring to outside sources as necessary. So the typical overuse of references to bloat this paper will be avoided. The professor also tells jokes, uses interesting visuals, and tells somewhat off-topic stories to maintain interest and attention as students are prone to distraction and mind-wandering. Now we come to the paragraph that truly begins the segue into my dissertation topic. The last 2 words out of the 7 are of an emotional nature. What does it mean for something to be interesting and enjoyable? I will approach enjoyable first, albeit out of order, as it is the more obvious emotional word. The emotion of joy will be experienced throughout. Joy is related to the opioid system. Something happens to us which causes the release of endogenous opioids in our brains, leading to a brief sense of what we call happiness, as well as a temporary reduction in pain. And we'll come back to this later. Overall enjoyment of something this length thus involves many separate instances of joy spread throughout. The reader will summarize the emotional ups and downs positively in the long run. Interestingly, interesting is somewhat different. While having interest in something is not necessarily an emotional reaction, the unique phenomenon of experiencing interest or engagement represents a distinct feeling of being in that state. Complex emotions such as frustration, boredom, engagement, and anxiety are more experiential and holistic than reactive, representing our overall assessment of change in psychological state through interaction. There exist professors who will get red-faced and argue with you if you insist interest or engagement are emotions, however, an anger reaction to psychological pain caused by cognitive dissonance. Emotions are such loosely defined words, as is the word emotion itself. Rather than giving a one-sentence attempt at a definition of what they are, the upcoming literature reviews will explore emotion from several different angles to give an educated, holistic sense of what they are. Before we get to the lit review, though, I need to be honest with you, reader. I do not want to write this. No one should have to write a dissertation. Knowing this, I cannot escape the underlying contempt, frustration, fed-upness, and other negative feelings present during my stints of writing. Nor would I want to. I don't believe in hiding emotion. If I didn't state these out loud, they would be ever present regardless in the emotional tone of my writing. You cannot escape the influence of underlying emotions. Since I did overtly say this, however, you can mentally prepare yourself more appropriately and focus on the positive aspects of my writing highlighted by C.C. Pye. If it helps, try to adapt my mindset of meta-humor and sarcasm in the face of adversity and flawed systems. Literature Review 1. A portrait of the artist as a young student. This first lit review contains various writings from Logan Hale pertaining to his work towards a Doctor of Philosophy in Human Factors Psychology. Oh, what a bright-eyed, motivated student he was, presenting at multiple conferences and giving talks on the machine learning of emotion throughout campus. He took all the classes he could and more, helped multiple people with their theses and dissertations, and conducted various other research projects. He gave guest lectures in psychoacoustics and psycholinguistics on his work, but no dissertation. In lieu of finding blame within the system itself, Let us assume it was student error. He must have been too introverted, anxious, or incompetent to get the work finished. Add COVID-19 and massive life changes into the mix. Now skip ahead 5 years to 2025. Let us reflect on his work, while leaving it mostly intact in its original form. Irrelevant sections have been largely removed, things have been reorganized and added, what does represent a fairly good attempt at a proposal document. Afterwards, we will explore my, as opposed to my past self's, current understanding of the topics discussed. The world has changed, as have I, but all the following information is still relevant today. On emotion. From an evolutionary standpoint, emotions serve as cues or markers for decisions our ancestors were faced with. According to Johnston, emotions are qualitatively different conscious states that have evolved to represent the nature, magnitude, and direction of expected threats or benefits to some aspect of our personal fitness. That is, we experience emotions similar to those experienced by our ancestors when faced with similar decisions or circumstances as them. On an individual level, these emotions are a learning mechanism used in our daily lives, serving as unconditioned responses to stimuli we encounter, thus shaping our short and long-term feelings towards and behaviors for these stimuli. This conveys the temporary reactionary role emotional states play. For this study, emotion could thus be defined as a temporary yet distinguishable shift in conscious state, elicited internally by some stimulus or stimuli. This definition of emotion only scratches the surface of the tip of the iceberg, however, and does little to aid in the application of emotion in system design. Emotion can be understood more clearly by relating it to similar concepts. Knowing generally what emotion is, a distinction must be made between emotion and mood for clarity. Brave and Nass elaborate on the differences between emotions, mood, and a third related concept, sentiment. While emotion is temporary and reactionary to specific stimuli, mood is a longer-term shift in psychological state in response to the overall situation or context of an individual's life. Mood can be visualized as a low-frequency baseline shift in feeling, where emotion could appear as high-frequency spikes and dips in feeling. Sentiment, on the other hand, is one's feeling or impression about something. For example, think about McDonald's, Coldplay, BMW. How do you feel about those specific brands? Distinctions between emotion, mood, and sentiment are blurry, and are not surprisingly blurred in many scientific studies and theories. In studying emotional experiences, scientists often utilize post hoc subjective assessments of emotion, asking participants how they felt during certain events, including experimental conditions within their studies. These subject assessments of emotion, however, fail to capture actual experienced emotion during those events, instead assessing sentiment towards past stimuli. As an example, Waskowski and Irola compared subjective sentiment assessments about sad events to post hoc word association tasks. Participants recalled a sad autobiographical event or listened to sad music for a period of time, afterwards indicating their believed emotional state throughout the time and completing the word association task. While participants reported feeling sad, their associations were more positive, indicating happy emotion but sad sentiment, or possibly just an inability for people to accurately ascertain their own emotions in retrospect. Either way, this raises the necessity for developing means of measuring emotion during events rather than relying on subjective assessments. Then, the main roadblock becomes improving the validity and reliability of emotional measures. While actual emotional state lies along a continuum or several continua, the term emotion is often an attempt at naming or categorizing distinct states. The 6 primary emotions of this type are joy, sadness, anger, disgust, fear, and surprise, with a neutral state frequently included as well. While these theoretically distinct emotions have been studied extensively, even demonstrating immunity to racial and cultural boundaries, they represent the extremes of emotional space. Joy, for example, is possibly the most intense distinct emotion representing happiness, occurring when something exceptional happens, such as a child being born or $1 million being won, yet there are an overabundance of other forms of happiness. Joy, contentment, romantic love, blithe, satisfaction, excitement, and even fun and engagement could all fall under the umbrella of happiness. When emotion is broken down into these smaller components with often ill-defined, fuzzy boundaries between them, the ability to distinctly classify them as well breaks down. This can be viewed as a top-down problem. It is easy to presume that distinct classifications exist and tailor studies to them, yet this does little to shed light on underlying mechanisms of emotion. Antithetically, a bottom-up problem persists in the literature as well, especially in applied fields such as human factors. This problem likely stems from the stigma of emotion research being qualitative and basic. As if the term emotion itself were toxic, researchers purposefully avoid the word in place of stress, arousal, flow, and so on, or discuss emotions such as boredom and engagement as if they exist outside of emotional space altogether. While stress and arousal are important constructs in themselves, this problem arises when researchers use them as proxies for shifts in psychological state, emotion, without acknowledging that they are only one factor contributing to emotion. So the bottom-up problem is one of being focused on aspects of emotion while missing the bigger picture. The acknowledgement of emotion is essential in the field of human factors, since it is known to have a profound impact on users' attention to, memory of, performance with, and assessment of a system. As the desire for emotionally receptive and responsive systems increases, detection and differentiation of emotional states and expressions becomes more important. Systems are designed with emotions in mind, usually intending to instill contentment, engagement, excitement, and other positive feelings in their user. Getting anything out of this dissertation requires you to be engaged. Engagement, like many emotions, is ill-defined, and some would argue is not an emotion at all. In terms of user interaction with a system, O'Brien and Toms define engagement as follows. Quote, engagement is a quality of user experiences with technology that is characterized by challenge, aesthetic, and sensory appeal, feedback, novelty, interactivity, perceived control of time, awareness, motivation, interest, and affect. End quote. However, this is largely a contributory definition of engagement. It states features of task interaction which all contribute to the activation and retainment of a unique psychological state labeled as engagement. Engagement can really only be defined as the state of being engaged, just as the definition for happiness is the state of being happy, and for sadness is the state of being sad, since emotional states are subjective by nature. Nevertheless, a general sense of what engagement is can be expressed by comparing it to other emotional states. It is similar to interest, enjoyment, fun, immersion, involvement, and the popular flow state. Flow seems to actually be a prolonged state of extreme engagement. As found with flow research, engagement theoretically represents an ideal halfway zone between boredom and anxiety, determined by task difficulty relative to user skill. The study of emotions in this context has increased exponentially as a result of advancements in technology, namely visual, auditory, and brain imaging technologies. Given the rapid advancement of these technologies, as well as the technologies being studied, emotional reactions to new types of tools and systems are largely unexplored, requiring more detailed consideration from the research community. Emotionally intelligent systems. Within the field of human factors psychology, there is a modern interest and surge of research around the topic of system adaptation. Sophisticated machine learning algorithms are implemented in order to classify and understand grossly complex aspects of the world around us and the even grosser and even more complex worlds within our heads. Findings from these complicated algorithms can then be used by intelligences, be they organic or artificial, to make decisions towards some benefit. As a prominent example, automobiles fitted with these technologies could drive themselves in varying environments and conditions. On the other hand, Facebook and Google could track what we look at and search for to target us with specific content, namely advertisements. The positivity or negativity of the latter example is up to each individual, yet it does demonstrate systems which attempt to detect behavioral and psychological characteristics of users, modifying themselves accordingly, prototypical antecedents of emotionally intelligent artificial intelligence. One online article exposits on the potential risks of emotionally intelligent AI. The article, and more so the comments section, paints a picture of fear. Fear of AI becoming more human than us, of being able to read our thoughts, of manipulating and taking advantage of us, of traveling back in time to kill our leaders. Humans as a whole, however, are surprisingly comfortable with the gradual integration of these types of AI into their everyday lives. Desire for the convenience of smartphones, smart televisions, smart refrigerators, smart homes, and personal AI assistants to order pizzas and dim lights seemingly outweighs desire for privacy of personal information. As an internet meme pertaining to Amazon's Alexa and similar devices puts it, people in the 60s were saying, the government will wiretap your home. Now people are saying, hey wiretap, can cats eat pancakes? What better way can scientists utilize this plethora of freely given verbal information than by determining how speakers feel in order to improve their lives in some way? Hale recently discussed a need for human factors research to focus on the emotional characteristics of speech signals. As temporary psychological state or emotion changes, so do the physical characteristics of speech waves. The problem lies in taking this information-riddled signal and decoding it in a way to extract usable data. With the right modeling procedures, systems could detect underlying emotion of their users with equal or greater accuracy to that of other humans. While many have tried to do this, modeling procedures, observed emotions, and obtained accuracies have varied wildly. As well, research into the actual incorporation of these models into systems is lacking. Ideally, systems could be designed to detect and adapt to emotional states of users while users are interacting with them, to give the best possible experience with the system. Contextual emotional state temporally surrounding and throughout a system interaction affects user sentiment regarding the system as well. Research out of the MIT Emotion Laboratory has greatly advanced our knowledge on emotion detection and system adaptation to emotion. In some cases, systems themselves may act as usability experts. If they are able to associate users' emotional states with specific operations of a system, what tasks the user is performing or what feedback the system is giving, they can pass on this information to system designers for use in future iterations. Or, if the system itself is capable of doing so, it can adapt in real time to the needs of the user, changing some aspect of the task or at least providing feedback or direction on how to properly perform it. A person's emotion can have a profound impact on his or her interaction with the system and vice versa. These interactions between human and system closely resemble interactions between human and human or between human and animal. In light of this information, systems' ability to adequately convey and react to emotions must be addressed with great caution. Systems incorporating artificially intelligent agents are seen as more likable and trustworthy when the agent conveys empathic emotion towards the user. This could be, for example, a face that smiles at the user when he or she is happy, or a voice that encourages the user when he or she is frustrated. Agents increasing user expectations Agents that appear to have their own emotions, however, run the risk of entering the uncanny valley or increasing user expectations beyond what the system is capable of. Therefore, non-human or humanoid agents can be employed to reduce these effects. If the system appears human, the user expects human-like performance and emotional responses, including emotional characteristics in artificial speech. This is especially relevant in 2025, at a time when interaction with AI within applications and systems has become a nigh inescapable necessity of daily life. Some people's only social interaction is simulated with these artificial agents, and AI friends and romantic partners are becoming increasingly common. Wolf et al. Conducted an observational study to better understand naturally occurring emotions of students while interacting with an AI math tutor. Behaviors observed were body movement, head movement, facial expression, and talking, all which can be ascertained relatively unobtrusively. An important finding from this study is that task engagement, a highly desirable state in system interaction, is related to decreased movement and overall expressiveness. But this itself presents a problem with quantifying engagement. It is difficult to differentiate between it and other emotional states with little outward expression, such as boredom or simply tiredness. Additionally, if users know that a system is attempting to decode their emotional state, a human-like action, their behaviors will be affected in response. In determining emotion from system users, the system must take into account the user's ability to mask emotion. While overt behaviors such as smiling or frowning can be utilized in the context of social interactions in order to convey emotion, humans possess the capacity and drive to manipulate their overt emotional states for social gain or compliance. The same can be said for speech, as one can overtly sound happy but can be covertly sad or angry. It is, however, virtually impossible to completely disguise actual felt emotion, as unconscious conveyances such as micro-expressions, micro-utterances, and other subtle cues surface. While there is a distinction between overt and covert emotional states, there's also a distinction between conscious and unconscious states. A person can perceive himself or herself through self-report as experiencing one emotion while actually experiencing an entirely different or even opposite emotion. Studies have shown that participants exposed to sad, meaningful music report sadness but low valence happiness. This phenomenon will occur when post hoc self-report is used to study emotion. It is often quite difficult for users to describe complex emotions that they felt during a task or interaction, or the choices they're given to describe these emotions may be inadequate. Stopping during a task to ascertain self-reports of emotion at the given moment may seem like it would give more valid results, but doing so interrupts the flow of the task and will undoubtedly alter emotion itself. The only reason self-report of emotion should be used in systems is if the system is... Hold on, give me a second. I have to fix a typo. Back to it. The only reason self-report of emotion should be used in systems is if the system is interested in only the overt emotion of the user, how they believe they feel, rather than their actual felt emotion. A primary example of a self-report emotion measurement in human factors is the NASA Task Load Index, NASA TLX. It is comprised of 6 items, one of which is a frustration measurement, a direct subjective score of a user's self-perceived emotion, albeit one specific overall emotion. In a similar vein, Yang and Dornake asked how motivated and confident users were with a tutoring system after 20 trials with different difficulty levels and different etiquette strategies of system response. In human factors, it appears that self-report scales are rarely used for determining real-time emotion, but instead for determining holistic emotion and sentiment, things such as overall frustration, confidence, motivation, trust, and the feeling of safety, which are important in the field. Since self-report cannot be used to ascertain actual experienced emotion, objective measures of emotion are needed. Picard refers to objective measures of emotion taken while a task is being performed as concurrent expression. Emotion can be viewed as a combination of 3 observable elements: physiological responses, overt behaviors, and conscious feelings. Since conscious feelings can only be obtained through self-report, behavioral, physiological, and pseudo-physiological measures of user emotion can be used as proxies, with varying levels of obtrusiveness and intrusiveness. Wolf et al. Constructed a system which utilizes a pressure-sensitive seat and computer mouse, camera for facial features, and wireless skin conductance bracelet. These represent 4 of many measurements which require special equipment and are relatively unobtrusive. Physiological, tactile, visual, and auditory measures of emotion are all quantifiable with different levels of intrusiveness and obtrusiveness. The ideal measurement system will be non-intrusive, unobtrusive, and give sufficient enough insight into emotional state for some determination or classification of actual felt emotion, while also being usable outside of an experimental setting for personal use of the system. Physiological and similarly neurological measurements are most often used in the quantification of emotion. Heart rate and heart rate variability, skin conductance, electromyograms, and so on can be used as measure of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system activation, or physiological arousal. Arousal is known to be the primary component of emotion, accounting for around 75% of emotional variance, but as stated before, Relying on arousal as the only measure of emotional state is inadequate, since it does not consider emotional valence or control, or any of the other proposed aspects of emotion. In some instances, though, this may not be an issue. In one study, call center employees wore skin conductance wristbands throughout the day while giving self-reports on their stress level for each call. A machine learning model was able to predict with close to 80% accuracy, high in terms of emotion detection, if a call was stressful or not based on skin conductance alone. In very specific settings such as these, in this example, a simple arousal measure can serve as a measure of emotion, since it is theoretically assumed that all calls range from not stressful, low arousal, to stressful, high arousal. So, for systems in which emotion is entirely binary, with two emotions on either end of the arousal dimension, physiological measures can be extremely accurate and single variable proxies for emotion. Physiological measures require at least some amount of obtrusiveness, as pads or wearable devices must be used, barring expensive equipment to measure them without physical contact. These measures are the best indicator of physiological arousal, and so can be used to measure this aspect of emotion, while other measurement methods attempt to decode valence and control. Another possible benefit to the incorporation of physiological measurements into a system is that smart devices which measure this information are somewhat common. Smartwatches and fitness trackers. So they could potentially be utilized outside of an experimental setting for field studies or personal tracking. Neurological measures, on the other hand, may give great insights into the brain's emotional reactions to a system beyond just physiological arousal. However, electroencephalography can be extremely obtrusive. The more electrodes used, the more data gathered, but also the more obtrusive and difficult to set up. Additionally, the use of EEGs outside of an experimental setting is out of the question, except maybe with expensive personal equipment. The amount of data obtained from neurological measurements adds layers of complexity over other measurement techniques. Without a deep, theory-based understanding of emotional changes in the brain, it's easy to get lost in the mountains of big data or meaningless machine learning output, as many do. Tactile measures of emotion, such as the pressure-sensitive devices utilized in Wolf et al., are good at giving a surface-level indication of emotional state. The amount of pressure the user puts on parts of a chair or on devices used in system operations such as computer mice and keyboards, game controllers, joysticks, buttons, and the like, can be used somewhat as proxies for specific emotions. As evidenced by Wolf et al., a frustrated user will fidget in their chair while applying more pressure to the mouse. An engaged user, on the other hand, will move less overall while applying less pressure. These measurements are unobtrusive since they utilize devices already used in system interaction. Excuse me. Albeit with some modifications, which are not readily available outside an experimental setting. Visual measures of emotion are used quite often as well. These include any physical movement that can be observed with the camera, such as eye movement, facial expression, and head and body movement, gestures. Face, head, and body movement could also potentially be measured via physiological or tactile means, but this would require some level of obtrusiveness, such as the special set of expression gloves used by Picard. This form of measurement is not very obtrusive, considering it only uses cameras, yet may be somewhat intrusive to users if large cameras or the idea of being recorded makes them feel uncomfortable while interacting with the system. The user must likely also stay in a fixed position, possibly with a chin rest, to ensure extraneous movement is minimized. Lighting and depth must be considered as well. Standard cameras a user may personally own likely lack the field of view, frames per second, and resolution required to perform analyses equivalent to those performed in a laboratory setting with experiment quality cameras, so usefulness outside of these settings is hampered. Auditory measures of emotion must often involve measuring a user's speech, be it the words used or the raw speech signal itself. They are similar to visual measures, yet with a few distinct advantages. First, an audio signal is one-dimensional rather than two, meaning fewer sources of extraneous information and fewer processing resources used for analysis. Second, commercially available microphones, even those found in smartphones, laptops, and cars, are capable of recording a relatively high quality signal compared to experiment quality microphones. Third, microphones do not require a user to stay in one set location, so they can move freely, although it is preferred they maintain a set distance. While it may seem like auditory measurement should be the de facto means of measuring emotion, there is one big problem. The user has to actually produce auditory information. That is, they have to be speaking somewhat regularly. Forcing users to speak during a task may be intrusive to task performance, much like stopping to give self-reports. For tasks which naturally involve search speech feedback from a user, or for which a speech component can be integrated, however, auditory emotion measurements are most likely the closest to ideal in terms of measuring actual emotion. While speech signals are filled with information on the emotional state of speakers, there are complications in its analysis. It is not yet clear exactly which speech characteristics are affected by emotion, and how these characteristics change between different contexts or different speakers. Emotions can also be extremely short-lived, even changing mid-sentence. To better understand the intricacies of speech characteristic variation related to emotion, it is important to understand the physiology of emotional speech. On that note, I'm going to get some water. I would turn this off and turn it back on, but I'm not doing that. Enjoy the sounds of water in the left ear and the right ear. Enjoy the sounds of me drinking water occasionally. Better than having a scratchier and scratchier throat throughout. Feel free to pause this and get your own water. Clear your ears out. Take a walk. Meditate or something. I think it's a good time right now to take a little bit of a break. Okay. Back to it. Emotion in speech. Briefly put, speech is a controlled expulsion of air from the lungs, through the glottis, the space between the vocal cords, and finally out the mouth and nose, which can be shaped by minute changes to this pathway into recognizable sounds for means of vocal communication. All of this occurs, of course, as a response from neural signals to the muscles involved in speech. Speech sound passes through the air as a single complex sinusoidal wave, with sound pressure changing over a period of time. Common visualization of this can be found in Figure 3. A sound wave such as this can be broken down through the process of Fourier transformation and analyzed in terms of energy across the entire speech frequency spectrum, as seen in Figure 4. The shape of this speech spectrum and its changes over time are what analyzation software can use to determine, among other things, underlying psychological characteristics of the speaker. While speech is used to convey meaning through oral language, the linguistic property of speech, the transformed speech spectrum, holds detailed information on the underlying prosodic or paralinguistic properties, aside from the actual words being spoken. From physical properties of the speech spectrum, physiological attributes of the speaker can be determined with relative ease, and then these physiological attributes can be used as factors in making certain classifications in regard to speaker's psychological state. The main emotional physiological attribute loading on speech spectrum changes is known to be physiological arousal, which accounts for around 70 to 80% of variance in the spectrum across studies. While arousal's effects on speech have been heavily studied and theorized, the effects of other supposed aspects of emotion, such as valence and control, are largely unknown or baselessly theoretical. Arousal is the main component of all theory-based models involving the decoding of speech, the decoding of emotion from speech, given its large relation to emotion. Arousal has even been broken down into subcomponents, such as energy arousal, tiredness and awakeness, and tension arousal, tension and relaxation, in one study measuring subjective emotion of music and speech. Excuse me again. Aside from arousal, valence, pleasantness or unpleasantness is often included. Other less common inclusions are stance, attention and rejection, and power, sense of control over emotion. Or more often than not, in modern research concerning emotion in speech, dozens or hundreds of speech signal features are plugged into machine learning algorithms, with little regard to underlying factors involved, with the emphasis instead being on maximization of classification percentages. A concise literature review of modern research utilizing various machine learning techniques can be found with an article by Anagnostopoulos, Ilio, and Giannokis. Yeah, I'm sure 100%. Although only studies which found relatively higher percentages are listed. Findings from machine learning studies will be discussed more later on. To better understand possible components of emotional speech, physiology of speech and how emotion affects the physiology must be understood. The physiological speech pathway begins with the diaphragm pushing air out of the lungs. From the lungs, this exhalation of air passes through several shaping checkpoints, which impact spectral parameters of the final speech signal. The first crucial shaping point is in the laryngeal cavity. In the laryngeal cavity, laryngeal muscles manipulate vocal folds, closing and opening them. The opening through these vocal folds is called the glottis. The shape of the glottis determines bass frequencies for the speech signal and is heavily influential on the spectral quality of vowels and held consonants. Held consonants. From the laryngeal cavity, air passes up into the mouth or is somewhat directed through the nasal cavity. In the mouth, the tongue changes in size and position to further shape speech. The opening of the mouth as well, controlled by facial muscles, shapes sound somewhat. Given this plethora of muscles involved in speech production, changes in psychological factors which affect muscle activation, in this case the arousal aspect of emotion especially, have a substantial impact on changes in speech signal properties. Aside from these muscles directly associated with speech production, changes in physiological state will also inevitably affect all other muscles through the body, which will in turn directly or indirectly alter speech production. Physiological responses of emotion correspond primarily to the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is closely associated with a process known as the fight or flight response, or sometimes the fight, flight, or freeze response. The sympathetic nervous system causes increases in physiological systems that aid in short-term decision-making and survival, while causing simultaneous decreases in physiological systems that facilitate long-term decision-making and survival. Foveal vision increases at the cost of peripheral vision. Blood pressure, flow to motor muscles, and glucose level all increase, while blood flow to the digestive system and other non-essential long-term organs decrease. Notably, the sympathetic nervous system also has a pronounced effect on the muscles that produce and manipulate sound through the vocal pathway. When the sympathetic nervous system is active, the diaphragm pushes more air out of the lungs during speech and other non-speech exhalations. And muscles controlling the tongue and many laryngeal muscles exhibit quicker and more forceful movements. These changes lead to a pronounced speech pattern indicative of high arousal emotions: joy, anger, fear, surprise, and the like. Speech during high arousal emotional states is louder, faster, and more enunciated, as well as having a higher average pitch, more energy in the high frequency range, and a broader general range of pitch. These patterns in speech have been used as proxy for sympathetic nervous system activation in many studies, while some researchers refer to it as stress or simply arousal, depending on the study. Speech is additionally altered depending on the specific high valence emotion. In observing only one high valence emotion, such as joy or anger, binarily, overall sympathetic nervous system activation can be used as a proxy for the observed emotion. However, when simultaneously differentiating between various high valence emotions, additional semantic and prosodic evidence must be acquired. On the opposite side of the coin, low arousal emotions, primarily sadness, but also contentment or blithe, romantic love, and other less studied emotions, are associated with activation of the sympathetic nervous system's counterpart, the parasympathetic nervous system, and its subsequent effects on the vocal pathway. The parasympathetic nervous system and its subsequent effects on the vocal pathway. The parasympathetic nervous system, sometimes called the rest and digest system, causes increases in physiological systems that facilitate long-term decision-making and survival, while simultaneously de-emphasizing physiological systems that facilitate short-term decision-making and survival. Effects on speech are largely a mirror image of those found with sympathetic nervous system activation: lower average pitch, less energy in the high-frequency range, and a narrower range of pitch. With the physiology of speech in mind, speech breathing has an aperiodic component and a periodic component, which must both be considered during analysis of the speech signal. D'Alessandro and Doval. I haven't been reading those. The aperiodic component of speech is the underlying paralinguistic aspect of speech, largely aeroacoustic noise from air being forced through the vocal pathway. Aeroacoustic noise increases or decreases in volume due to differing amounts of pressure on the lungs from the diaphragm, the subglottal pressure. This noise is colored in that, unlike white noise, it is shaped by underlying properties of the speaker. Aside from aeroacoustic noise, the aperiodic component of speech involves any other paralinguistic qualities of speech which remain constant through an utterance. The aperiodic speech signal is where the known majority of emotional data lies. By filtering out periodic speech through methods similar to noise reduction, or by simply analyzing speech utterances holistically rather than frame by frame, this aperiodic aspect of speech can be better studied and understood. One interesting study concerning the development of an intelligent karaoke system involved breaking down user speech in real time, extracting the aperiodic component of speech exclusive to them, and incorporating the periodic aspects of a target singer, with the output being a perfect rendition of the target song, yet with the personal characteristics of the user's voice. Humans use aperiodic speech spectral cues during social interactions in order to make guesses as to the emotional or affective state of others during conversation. In order to effectively process speech, a system must do the same thing, especially if it is designed to classify and adapt to psychological characteristics of its users in some way. Spoken words or subjective assessments give an indication as to emotional state, but these may be unreliable as users misinterpret or actively misinterpret experienced emotion. Gian even proposes a model of speech processing which breaks down the verbal component of Wiccan's multiple resource theory into verbal and nonverbal components, since they are processed quite differently. Water break. How many pages are we in? 25. We're halfway done. There's a lot of pictures and stuff coming up, so less reading. I'm just adapting in the moment. I never read this out loud before. Anyway, system adaptation. How a system determines emotion of a user is important, but more so is how the system responds to the determined emotion of a user. An example of an adaptive system that incorporates speech as well as facial and gestural analysis of user emotional data to aid in its adaptation methods is the auto-tutor. This interactive tutor uses those three uses these three emotion-filled signals to adjust actions taken by an interactive school tutoring agent. The researchers were interested in emotions critical to task satisfaction: boredom, frustration, confusion, and engagement. Detection accuracy of these four emotions was 73%. However, they argue against adapting the system while users are in a state of engagement. So their goal with the autotutor was thus the amelioration of the three negative states. User facial expression, body movement, physiology, and speech all give insight into emotional states, but most methods of recording these from users are obtrusive or intrusive to performing tasks. Speech adaptation provides the best line of research in this area, given its relative unobtrusiveness to users. Research into speech has shown that emotion changes in a detectable manner while performing tasks, yet real-time adaptation to emotional speech has not been tested extensively. Speech is an ideal candidate for system assessment and conveyance of emotion. Recording speech from users requires only a microphone placed within their vicinity, as noise can be reduced or eradicated from the sound signal. Oh my, excuse me. Drank water too fast. Anyway, speech signals can be analyzed almost instantaneously to assess emotional state by comparing current state to baseline rates and known specific emotional changes on the speech spectrum. Conveyance of emotional or emotionally corrective, responsive auditory information can occur instantaneously as well, only requiring the user to be in the vicinity of a speaker. Abuse of emotionally adaptive systems, however, is inevitable. Company systems could potentially coerce users into unhealthy personal choices, while in negative emotional states, or target happy individuals for profit. Emotion-capable AI could manipulate users into acting outside of their comfort zone. In other words, emotionally intelligent systems could become as coercive and subversive as humans themselves currently are. This, however, involves using modeling algorithms in real time to keep track of constantly fluctuating emotions. Research up to now has utilized overly complicated classification, such as Gaussian mixture models, hidden Markov models, support vector machines, artificial neural networks, and so on. For example, see I-80, Kamel, and Carré, 2007. These models are decent at classifying emotion and a speech signal, but takes a substantial time to do so and cannot be modified in real time to fit the unique speech characteristics of an individual user. Literature Review 2. Oh, how naive I was. What a fun read. I give it a B+ on the CC Pi scale. Chalk up any flaws in the monetization process. Logan's understanding of emotion related to human factors concepts is evident, but I will need to add some crucial information I have learned since 2020. Sorry to say that my attention has primarily gone to learning, teaching, and applying this information rather than acquiring references to impress people, so the number of citations is rather small. That was a vague apology. Emotion undefined. Emotions begin in the orbitofrontal cortex. But let's take a step back first. Affect is a term which describes the constant flow of information from our bodies to one particular specialized organ in our bodies, the brain. Hunger, thirst, drowsiness, thirst, the other kind, and all other relevant signals of our bodily state get routed to the hypothalamus for processing, which, in tandem, monitors and regulates mood states through hormones. It is, of course, much more complicated than this, involving many other brain regions and pathways, but this is the necessary gist of it. Of the processes which the hypothalamus processes, the most sporadic is sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system activation. 70% of the variation in affect level throughout the day is a result of change in stress, or physiological arousal levels. Off topic, how hungry are you right now? At any point, you can access this information by thinking about it and assign a number value or descriptive word, resulting in a self-report of your current state of hunger, thirst, arousal, and so on. These levels are always constantly affecting your psychological state, whether you realize it or not. Sentiment is a term which describes the constant flow of emotional, affective information from long-term to working memory for relevant use in the current context. Experiences which produce changes in affect, i.e., all experiences, leave affective marks and memories which become attached to objects, environments, systems, other people, and so on. Simply hearing the word TikTok incites the emotional phantom of TikTok to visit your mind. You can self-report how much you like using the app and your feelings about other people's use of it. Your interactions with it or through it will be shaped by your sentiment going in, and your sentiment will in turn be affected by the affect experienced during those interactions. Thus, sentiments flavor our interactions while being constantly flavored by them in turn. Your friend Mark down the street also has a sentiment attached to him in your mind. This dissertation is adjusting your sentiment of me and of dissertations. Emotions begin in the orbitofrontal cortex. I'm pointing to it right now in my head. It's between the eyebrows-ish. Maybe a little down. Okay, somewhere there. The same part of the brain where taste and smell combines into flavor, shaped by our sentiments and expectations. This part of the brain combines information from disparate brain regions and networks into a more complex, experiential understanding of the situation and our place in it. This is, however, a conscious process, which is not always occurring. When someone cooks you a nice meal and asks you if you like it or not, the orbitofrontal it's not the orbitofrontal frontex. The orbitofrontal cortex fires up, allowing you to combine perceptions of taste and smell and context into a single word or sentence. It tastes great, but it could use a pinch of salt. Now, let me ask you, the reader, something. How do you feel right now? Congratulations, you just created an emotion. You combined your affect and sentiment into a single word or phrase. Bored? Hungry? Annoyed? Tired, with a hint of frustration. These are all emotions in the context because they represent an overall assessment of our holistic state in the context of the situation. Consciously processed and expressed in a distinct linguistic pattern for your own and others' understanding. Emotions have an inherently social aspect. Water break. So better reading this section than the heavily referenced section, or trying to actually read any scientific article out loud. Ugh. That's why they're so unappealing to me and people in general. Oh, anyway, back to it. An emotion is a word, or a chair, or emotion. A modern understanding of emotion is largely derived from the theory of constructed emotion proposed by Lisa Feldman Barrett. Essentially, it posits that emotions are constructed through interaction with substantial neurological evidence. This is in direct opposition to the historical theories of basic primary emotions made popular by Ekman and others, which point to the innate existence of 6 emotions across culture and time. I won't be entertaining any of these theories in this dissertation. We have known about constructivism since, at the latest, Jean Piaget's time in the early 1900s. Barrett's research doesn't add anything to this, and Ekman and others' research jumps to unscientific conclusions contradictory to human development. Affect is innate, sentiment building is innate, and combining them into descriptive words and phrases via conscious processing is innate. But emotions themselves are the learned result of the latter process. They are communicative descriptors, words and phrases, learned concepts which develop along with our language and social skills, akin to our knowledge of masculinity or femininity. In the preschool age of development, around 3 to 4 years old, children's brain development in the frontal lobe, coupled with their insatiable need for social interaction, result in the development of what you could call primary emotions, if you desired. Basic emotions is a somewhat more accurate descriptor. Simple to understand comes closer, since basic incorrectly implies they are building blocks of other emotions. Joy, sadness, anger, disgust, fear, surprise. Children learn the meaning behind these words in terms of their phenomenological feeling, their effects on them and others, their causes, their associated behaviors, their social desirability in different contexts, how they're expressed in others, how to react to their expression in others, how to hide them and mimic them. This occurs through interaction and trial and error across many trials and many errors. As well, they are typically learned in a specific order relative to their complexity, with joy and sadness arising first out of the 6. Any assertions that emotions exist before this time is a result of adultomorphism, unscientific ascribing of adult-like qualities to those too young to accurately assess or express them. Yes, I stated before that joy was the release of opioids, and that's true, but it is a small fraction of the truth. Joy is a word given to the holistic psychological experience typically associated with a release of opioids caused by some event. Joy is a word. Sadness is a word associated with the drop in opioids caused by removal of whatever caused their release in the first place. Surprise is a word associated with a sudden rise in sympathetic nervous system activation in response to an event we have yet to deem positive or negative. Anger is a word which describes a reaction to negative pain, physical or psychological. Fear is a word given to the feeling of avoidance of things which have caused pain in the past or we believe will cause pain. Disgust is a word which similarly describes the distaste for things which cause sickness or discomfort. Words, man, we made them up. But these are just casual or causal descriptions of emotion, what leads to them being felt. Beyond the preschool years, many more words are added to our internal dictionaries. Boredom, anxiety, interest, frustration, love, etc. These develop along with increased brain development in the frontal lobe and increased complexity of social interactions. And each emotional word we learn comes with an understanding of the feeling and expression of that emotion. Frustration becomes distinct from anger or aggravation or rage as we learn their complexities. Like gender, races, roles, and other descriptive words, they exist metasocially as concepts floating in the world we learn to attune to through interaction and experience. An emotion is like a chair. A chair exists because we've given it the word chair. Without anyone to describe it as such, it would simply be a collection of tree flesh, forced together into a strange shape. Without anyone to teach us, would we naturally learn to sit on it? What we do know is that our acknowledgement of the existence of a chair starts with individual sensory neurons firing, which are then composited together, unconsciously, into perceptions of angles, shadows, depth, etc., which are then composited into a conjunction in relation to environmental context. Chair. But the chair cannot exist within a vacuum of nothingness. Context and knowledge are essential. Likewise with emotion, signals from individual cells through the body, sensory level, combine into affect in the hypothalamus, perception level, which is combined with context or sentiment in the orbitofrontal cortex, conjunction level. The resulting emotion guides expectations and influences interactions with things and with others, depending on the particular emotion felt. Emotion is to motion what email is to mail. Movements in our bodies and brains are sent into the world to be picked up and understood by others. This is especially relevant to speech, language, and music production, as well as through behavioral interaction. In this vein, emotion could be defined as the communicative transfer of affect and sentiment through space. It could also be defined in an infinite number of other ways. There is enough philosophical waxing in this section alone for a decade of menorahs. Emotion is too complex for me to define, and the point of this section was to briefly address the complexity of emotion. It is whatever you say it is. Science doesn't define things, leave that to the English scholars. We are concerned with the underlying mechanisms of emotion and the effects they cause. Literally all you need to know for the hypothesis is that emotions exist. A hypothesis and a research question. The hypothesis of this study is simple. Discrimination of distinct emotions in speech can be improved by the addition of curve-fitting features at the spectral level. This will be explained further in the methods section, where past Logan thought it belonged. I see no reason to argue with him on this one. The joke is funnier if things are slightly confusing and out of order. Besides, there really is no literature review with this, as it was simply an idea that popped up in my head while looking at images of Fourier transformed speech spectrums. The best science fills gaps and answers previously unasked questions, but it makes for difficult writing. My research question builds off of the hypothesis: what can be learned about the underlying qualities of emotions from a discriminant analysis of speech signals? A lot, actually, but we'll get there in due time. What are the point lit reviews again? I forgot. Intermission. Scene. The curtains close. Take some time before the methods section to eat a snack, take a nap, drink some water, and maybe meditate a little. Your affect will affect your emotional reaction and judgments of what is to come. I need you at your most positive and alert to get the full intended experience. This is how I start semesters in most of my classes. I spend at least a day discussing the importance of them taking care of themselves and the effect it has on their education, attention, and lives. If you felt any negative emotions towards me or this dissertation up till now, see your therapist or preferred source of emotional support and guidance, such as a priest or spouse. Experiencing negative emotion in response to someone's positive efforts is an antisocial response. After a brief time, the curtains open back up. A sudden shift in scenery marks our return back to scientific writing. Hopefully you remember everything from Act 1. You can pause now and go do all those things. Make sure you're smiling and happy before you read any more. It's not my fault if you're upset by things. Not my fault if you have negative feelings or feel any need to tell me to change things. That's all entirely your issues that you're putting on other people. But isn't that what I'm doing right now? Oh, this thing's driving me fucking crazy. I hate doing this. Emotion modeling. For this study, a model of emotion recognition using only simple characteristics of speech was developed and tested utilizing linear discriminant analyses, LDA, on a pre-existing database of emotional speech. Emotion of a speaker, in regard to discriminant analysis, is a classification variable which alters underlying properties of the speech spectra, namely physiological arousal, which has been shown to repeatedly to account for a large percentage of emotional discrimination, typically around 70 to 80%. These underlying variables cannot be measured directly, so therefore a multitude of features were tested as discriminating variables. Underlying parameters then emerge as discriminant functions for determining emotion. Emotional speech database. A speech database with the following qualities was sought. It must be free to use, extensively researched, and of sufficient quality for analysis. Several freely available databases were looked at, but only one was of sufficient quality for use in modeling. This is the Berlin Emotional Speech Database. This database is often used in the development of emotion classification models or in other research into emotional speech. This database is especially fitting due to its inclusion of boredom and anxiety, which are not often included in emotional speech databases but are especially relevant to interactions. The Berlin database is made up of over 500 German utterances of acted emotional speech across 7 emotions. These emotions are joy, sadness, anxiety, boredom, disgust, anger, and neutral expressed through 10 sentences. 10 actors are represented in the database, 5 female, 5 male, ranging in age from 21 to 35 years. Sound files were recorded at a sampling rate of 16,000 Hz in a heavily noise-controlled laboratory studio. 509 utterances from the database were analyzed after discarding a small fraction for having peak frequencies below the normal range of human pitch, indicating prevalence of low-frequency noise. Of those analyzed, emotional categories are unevenly represented: 69 joy, 51 sadness, 66 anxiety, 81 boredom, 44 disgust, 123 anger, and 78 neutral. Oh, a lot of anger in there, a lot of anger. Choice of features and procedure for extraction. Given that the eventual goal of emotional speech recognition is to analyze user speech in real-time interactions, choosing features for extraction which can be obtained quickly and extract the most useful information was of utmost importance. For this reason, surface-level physical features of the speech spectra were tested. Deciding exact features to test required an understanding of the underlying parameters of emotional speech. While many models of emotion outside of speech focus on arousal, valence, and control as the three primary components of emotion, these are largely reductive. Mnemonic theories derive from research outside of speech analysis. There is little to no evidence supporting valence or control as detectable components of emotional speech. Instead, the present model focuses more on features relating to the shape of the overall Fourier-transformed speech spectrum. Johnston performed several experiments in which he altered the difficulty of a task while recording speech in self-reported emotional state. He found that pitch characteristics, linear slope, and power in the lower frequencies are all associated with changes in state. These findings served as the basis for choice of features in the present model, yet with much modification based on the underlying problems with using these features. MATLAB 2019 code was written to analyze utterances. Several years' worth of programming, machine learning processes, and rigorous study, yes, I'm glossing over this in a sentence, led to a relatively small set of 69 features compared to previous studies. The number 69 is the actual optimized number of features and not a joke number. Bootstrapping, Monte Carlo simulation, and several thousand rounds of trial and error were utilized to test a plethora of features to be included in the final model and to determine processing values such as smoothing, which is frequency over 120. Let's see. Sampling rate over 120. Emotion classification accuracies and chi-squares are prioritized. Now we will go over all 69 features in their order of extraction with an explanation of MATLAB code. First, native MATLAB functions were used for calculations of pitch, harmonic ratio, and loudness, with default window settings for pitch and harmonic ratio. Final pitch features extracted were mean, standard deviation, minimum, and slope and intercept of line fit. Final harmonic ratio features extracted were mean, standard deviation, and slope and intercept of line fit. The loudness feature is a singular value per utterance. Spectral features were then calculated with default parameters utilizing MATLAB's signal processing toolbox. These are entropy, roll-off, centroid, spread, skewness, flatness, crest, flux, slope, and decrease. Spectral kurtosis was the one set of features excluded after testing. For all these, the following values were extracted: mean, standard deviation, minimum, maximum, and linear slope and intercept. For some, minimums, maximums, and/or intercepts were excluded if they failed to contribute significantly to the overall model. For a full list of included values, see Appendix A. These constitute a large majority of features, 52, and will be discussed further in LDA classification results and discussion. Here is a brief description of these spectral properties. Spectral crest represents the extremity of peaks, or the max value compared to the mean value. Skew represents asymmetry, symmetry around the arithmetic mean. Entropy is noisiness or amount of change in signal. Flatness is the amount of peaks or flatness in signal, comparing the arithmetic to geometric mean. The spread is spread in relation to the centroid, which is the center of mass associated with brightness. Decrease is based on perception studies. It is spectral slope, but with a modified formula. Spectral roll-off is frequency below which is the majority of the power, 85% by default, and it can parse voice from unvoiced speech. Now, how quickly spectral slope is how quickly high frequencies tail off, and spectral flux is how quickly signal changes. In music, when used on music, it gives a ratio of music to speech, essentially, or music to singing voice. Well, I need to reorder these and reword them a bit. Further defense, if we get there. Then, a fast Fourier transform is performed on the entire utterance, transforming the raw speech signal into a frequency distribution ranging from 0 Hz to 8,000 Hz. Smoothing of this distribution was done at 1/120 of the sampling frequency, minimizing noise while retaining shape of the distribution. The spectrum was then standardized so that maximum intensity was equal to 1 for all samples to account for volume differences. From this smoothed and standardized distribution, several features were extracted. Area under the curve for the entire spectrum, area under the curve for the spectrum up to 2000 Hz, linear slope up to 2000 Hz, the first two coefficient values of a third order polynomial fit, which you'll have to look at the formula. They're underlined and bolded for your convenience. Up to 2000 Hz, and the exponent value of an exponential fit, up to 2000 Hz. The impact of polynomial and exponential features on the overall model is the primary focus of this study's hypothesis. LDA classification results and discussion. Table 1 displays classification results for the LDA for the 69 extracted features. Overall classification accuracy is 90.4% across all 7 motions. While classification accuracy wasn't the goal of this study, this does represent an extremely accurate model with an extremely small number of extracted features, with those features being easy to understand and acquire. Tables 2 and 3 show LDA function values. Chi-square, a value of the entire LDA model with all 6 discriminant functions, is 2637.148. Function 6 with the chi-square score of 170.004 is significant in itself, indicating the importance of all 6 functions in the final model. All 6 functions will be discussed in detail in the next section. To test the hypothesis that curvilinear features would be significant additions to emotional speech modeling, contribution of individual features was calculated by summing absolute values of the structure matrix per feature. It's Appendix B. Table 4 shows an abbreviated list of the highest contributing factors. The second coefficient of a third order polynomial fit under 2000 Hz, or no, give me a second here. I had to correct something again. Okay, the second coefficient of a third order polynomial fit shows the highest contribution to the model across all 6 functions. The first coefficient is lower on the list, but still contributes heavily to model accuracy. The exponent coefficient of an exponential fit contributed heavily to the overall model, and more specifically has the highest correlation with function 1, which, as we'll get into, represents sympathetic nervous system activation. Taken together, it is clear that these curve-fitting features are indeed incredibly influential on model accuracy and should be incorporated into any future models of emotional speech detection. Further testing could be done to expand on these findings, testing them with different parameters and over time. Yes. And I'll just say the top 10 features that are in Table 4 are the second coefficient of a third order polynomial is the most influential. Then it is spectral flatness mean, so like the overall spectral flatness in one number. And then below that is the linear slope of the entire spectrum. Below that is the spectral spread mean. Below that is the linear slope of up to 2000. Below that is the harmonic ratio mean. Below that is the exponent coefficient of an exponential fit. Below that is the intercept, actually, of harmonic ratio. That's the intercept of the linear like slope of it. Very interesting, very interesting. Below that is pitch mean and then pitch standard deviation. So quite a few things are more informative than pitch values, the main pitch values. And then somewhere farther down that list is the first coefficient of a third order polynomial, which was less influential overall, but did factor into especially the second discriminant function. Water break, water break. LDA, function analysis and discussion. Further understanding of underlying factors on emotional speech can be gained through the examination of all 6 discriminant functions individually, which, by the nature of LDA, have zero correlation with one another and maximize the discriminative power of the model. Essentially, during classification, individual utterances are compared to centroids for each emotion in 6D space. To give a feel for what this means, Figure 5 shows the first 3 functions plotted in a 3D space. Colors were chosen to enhance clarity while somewhat representing the emotions. I'll let you pause here and look at this graph that you can't move, but believe me, it's 3D. And you can sort of clearly see, even with those first 3 discriminant functions, that they do cluster together around these centroids, like and sort of a singular point that represents each emotion. That the way it determines emotion is seeing which one it is closest to and giving sort of a percentage based on distance. But I don't want to include too much of a discriminant analysis explanation in my paper. Seems a bit silly. No one else does that. Moving on. The largest function typically seen in emotion speech modeling, accounting for around 75% of variance in previous and existing models, is known to be physiological arousal. In this study's LDA, however, function 1 only accounts for 57.4% of variance, whereas functions 1 and 2 combined account for 73.5% variance. With the particular features of this study, physiological arousal was bifurcated into its 2 main components, sympathetic and parasympathetic activation. As far as I know, this has never been demonstrated before, though through speech. While this is speculative, evidence can be found in the examination of functions 1 and 2. I've got to correct another typo here. Okay, back to it. Oh no, oh no. I just made it a worse typo. I'm typing on an upside down keyboard as I talk. Okay. While this is speculative, evidence can be found in the examinations of functions 1 and 2. Let's do that. Figure 6 shows all 7 emotions in relation to function 1. The y-axis for discriminant functions is relative and centered around 0, so its values are excluded for these figures. This box and whisker plot shows a stereotypical progression of emotions from highest sympathetic arousal to lowest: anger, joy, anxiety, disgust, neutral, boredom, and sadness. By itself, function 1 divides emotions fairly linearly across sympathetic arousal space. In previous iterations of this model and from past research, sadness shows a more distinct separation from boredom in the first function. The unique features included in the present model, however, display a separation of sadness from the other emotions in function 2, figure 7. As sadness is the only emotion of these 7 to have high parasympathetic activation, this would need to be tested further with a wider assortment of parasympathetic emotions. The potential for these 2 divisions of arousal to be separately detected from speech signals is worthy of a dissertation itself, honestly, if I felt like writing that much about it. Taken by itself, Function 2 is important within the model for its separation of sadness from the other tested emotions, especially neutral and boredom, which have similar levels of sympathetic activation. Both functions 1 and 2 have a varied assortment of speech features which load significantly onto them, including the curve-fitting coefficients mentioned above, pitch and harmonic ratio values, and so on. This is to be expected due to the wide effects of these two systems on physiology. Function 3 shows an apparent curvilinear relationship with arousal, centered around anxiety. Without speculation, the meaning of this is difficult to ascertain. I could say that anxiety exhibits a particular moderate level of sympathetic arousal, which coincides with the unique physiological expression through speech, dropping off in a predictable curvilinear pattern with higher or lower levels of arousal. But again, this is just speculation with fancy words. It is interesting, though, and warrants further exploration in future studies. Taken by itself, Function 3 is essential for accurately differentiating anxiety from other emotions in the model. Standard deviations of several spectral features, roll-off, spread, crest, and centroid, and linear slope for the entire signal and up to 2000 Hz load onto this function. Function 4 doesn't show any especially distinct pattern for me to discuss. It contributes to the model by somewhat differentiating emotions from surrounding emotions in arousal space, namely boredom from neutral and sadness, anger from joy and anxiety, anger from joy and anxiety from joy and disgust. Spectral spread features, minimum, maximum, and standard deviation, spectral roll-off features, maximum and standard deviation, minimum spectral skew, and standard deviation of pitch load onto this function. Function 5 is much more insightful, figure 10. With the given 7 emotions, neutral and disgust represent extremes on this function, with the other 5 emotions clustering in the middle. This indicates that disgust is an emotion which, at least in some part, is uniquely expressed verbally in a unidirectional manner. Speaking of disgust, sorry for burping. You can probably feel that if you're wearing headphones. And feel me swallow water and stuff. And feel whatever that disgust is like in your head. And question how it's moving your face and stuff to make you potentially speak differently. Anyway, where was I? I'm going to start this paragraph over. Function 5 is much more insightful, figure 10. With the given 7 emotions, neutral and disgust represent extremes on this function, with the other 5 emotions clustering in the middle. This indicates that disgust is an emotion which, at least in some part, is uniquely expressed verbally in a unidirectional manner. Hold on, I need to take a word out. It's a grammatical error. I say is twice. Oh, there we go. Alright, let's start the paragraph over. I'm not going to edit any of this out, by the way. I'm just saying things out loud. Function 5 is much more insightful. With the given 7 emotions, neutral and disgust represent extremes on this function, with the other 5 emotions clustering in the middle. This indicates that disgust is an emotion which, at least in some part, I need to read this sentence a couple times in my head. This indicates that disgust is an emotion which, at least in some part, is uniquely expressed verbally in a unidirectional manner. I need to rewrite that at some point, but not right now. Moving on. That is to say, there are likely specific speech properties which are not present in neutral, which emerge to indicate disgust. To speculate, this may be due to the scrunching of the face, which is overtly expressed with disgust, altering the speech pathway around the mouth and nose in a particular way. Taken by itself, function 6, not surprisingly, is vital for differentiation of disgust from other emotions. Given the low number of disgust utterances relative to other emotions in the model, 44 overall disgust utterances, this could be explored in future studies with a larger disgust pool. Standard deviation values for several features, harmonic ratio, spectral entropy, flatness, roll-off, and spread, all load onto this function. Function 6, shown in figure 11, greatly increases the model's ability to differentiate joy from anger and anxiety, primarily anger. Features loading onto this function are especially interesting. Several spectral crest, spectral skew, pitch, and harmonic ratio values, among others, indicate characteristic changes in the signal which could aid in differentiating high sympathetic arousal emotions, to be tested in future studies. Alright. General discussion. I just saluted. And I do mean general. I never want to look at these numbers, programs, or figures again, and I certainly never want to write about them again. I dread having to sift through the thousands of articles I read, dozens of books, hundreds of TED Talks and lectures, and all the other sources I learned from to find specific citations or try to compare my findings to others. But anyone can email me at any time to ask questions about any topic I went over in this thing, as long as I live. Instead, let's discuss something infinitely more important than a forced, standardized, linear paper. How I have applied what I learned about emotion in the years I've been studying it. True, meaningful science lies in its application to the real world. From a professor's standpoint, emotion is vital to every aspect of teaching. Influenced by emotion in education research, I have actively put more emotion into my voice, face, body, and words, and seen gradual, substantial effects on student engagement and attendance over the years. I consider emotion when I make slides for class, create assignments, and decide on pictures, jokes, stories, etc. Setting the stage at the beginning of class, ending on a high note, the list goes on. After a while, it becomes natural, and the confidence of knowing how to express it and affect it in others is birthed from the stress of testing it out and seeing the effects. What are students learning if they're not engaged, interested, and hopeful? From a broader educational standpoint, emotion is largely treated as unwelcome and unprofessional, as most adults over 30 who have chosen to enter established systems prefer the easy route of emotional suppression and settled ignorance, while students are rewarded for keeping their toes in line and exhibiting type A mature behaviors mimicking the elders who force it. Emotion, an integral part of every second of our lives, which gives it color and purpose, is too messy and complicated and gives people the ick. Acknowledgement of emotion in oneself or others reminds people of the human, biological, uncontrollable aspects of existence. People drink, smoke the green herb, and take any assortment of other drugs they can find to experience emotion in a socially acceptable way in brief bursts to accommodate this suppression of emotion in workplaces and schools. We already know men are generally not allowed to express intense emotion except in certain circumstances, often leading to negative labeling and ostracization. My explorations into music and other forms of art stemmed heavily from emotion research. It is not a far cry to say that emotion in speech is similar to emotion in musical expression, both via instruments and via the singing voice. I'm sitting next to the Oxford Handbook of Music Psychology as I write this. I'm standing next to it as I read it, walking back and forth. The book goes through several hundred articles, at least, covering some of the effects of music on physiology and psychology, if you want a place to start learning about it. Music theory and other expressive therapies are well documented in their ability to allow and teach appropriate emotional expression through various forms as well. From learning music myself, I see the similarities between it and teaching. Emotion incorporated into body movement, facial expression, vocal expression, word usage and order, and visual elements all add to the impact of songs. As well, getting into music by dancing along or emoting in any of the ways mentioned above has a dramatic impact on the appreciation of music. It can be taught and learned, but music instruction typically only teaches technical aspects of music playing while neglecting the core concept of emotional expression. One day I will fix that. There is no punchline, it just ends. Appreciate the joke while it's happening. Anyway, here's references. It used to be 6 pages of references. Took a bunch out. Unnecessary. Which is like lists of articles that all did the same machine learning crap and found basically the same thing. easier for me to just summarize it in a sentence or two than it is to regurgitate a bunch of nonsense. Just thinking if there's anything else I want to say. None of this is like scripted or anything. Let's see. No, that's all. How long was this? Oh, an hour and 40 minutes of just straight up talking mostly the whole time. So, yeah. Have a good day. Have a good life. Whatever.